Okay, now I'm not worried about, not at this point, or really going to be at any point, do you agree with Pollitt, do you agree with Colson? But I want to kind of get your reactions to the way that they present the argument itself. Couple disclaimers. Number one, there's a lot of the things that, we talk about argumentation and whatnot. We introduced the VRQ question this week. This is not a topic. Same-sex marriage is not going to be showing up on the AP exam. They're not going to go into topics like abortion, capital punishment with the death penalty, same-sex marriage, so far as socially charged issues with the DRQ. The most, and even to call it controversial, I think is probably a little bit of an overstep. The most political kind of topic that I can recall coming up on an AP exam would be mandatory voting. Taking an argument as to whether everyone 18 should vote in all elections. So the chances of something like this happening, I would say, are very slim. Now, by me saying that, when you take the AP exam in May, you'll probably get a question like, dealing with same-sex marriage, and then you all come back mad at me for telling you you'll never have to deal with a question about it, but you'll forget I said that. Thank you. Yes, we will, because I'll say the joke again, and then we'll still laugh. So, from an argument standpoint, what are things that you notice about him? Pollitt is still a writer. She is a columnist for The Nation. She tends to be pretty liberal in her viewpoints. She likes to push the envelope a little bit and uses humor probably as a way to counteract any arguments that might be coming against her. Colson, much more traditional, much more conservative in his viewpoint. Not somebody who most folks would probably think humor is going to work with when it comes to the type of argument that he creates. So, what do you notice? Reactions to either of the two? We can go back and forth between them.
I think like.
Is that your right hand or left? Okay.
I think Pollitt, she did a good job of coming up with any possible argument to give her, and she explained why she as well.
So like counter arguments. So those who could be against same-sex marriage might argue this idea, but here's the problem with that train of thought. Okay, so good counter arguments. Would you say that she still advances her own viewpoint, or is she focusing more on, well, this is what they'll say, here's why they're wrong, here's what they'll say, this is why they're wrong? Do you think she still gets her point across?
I mean, I feel like it's heavier on the counter argument side, but I guess still kind of getting her point across. You know what she meant by the end.
Okay, so you're still clear with her position, but she puts a lot of emphasis on that. Okay, good. Abe?
I feel like one thing that Pollitt did, she focused a lot on the counter arguments and then, really drove her argument home at the end. She talked about this separation of churches. That was her main point.
So emphasizes her point, kind of like as the article progresses. And it's something to keep in mind. She's a columnist. She's not writing this for 11th grade AP class to pick apart. Her intent is certainly going to be a little bit different. If you're writing a newspaper column or article for a magazine, you're certainly going to do things that are going to be catchy, that are going to try to evoke a little bit of a reaction. Certainly the topic in 2003, 2004, when this is going on, is very controversial. Mentioned Supreme Court has not come down yet with any kind of ruling at this point, still years away from that. So it does make sense to kind of start off with, I know what people are going to argue, and here's thoughts about this and thoughts about that and the other parts. Then kind of come back with your home run idea at the end. That certainly can make sense. But yeah, certainly something that she's going to take a look at is this whole idea of separation of church and state, which is a big deal. Not that she has Charles Colson in mind when she's writing this, but certainly that aspect is going to be important for her. What's the role of a government versus role of the church? Because you're dealing with the person who's involved in church ministry, within the prison system for 30 years. So certainly his viewpoint, his perspective is going to be very, very different. Something that you certainly have to consider, whether you're analyzing the argument of two people or you're creating your own, make sure you, not necessarily tap into, but make sure you understand people's values. Because what's the topic that we're dealing with? I heard mumbles, but I couldn't. All right, gay marriage, same-sex marriage. What would you suspect would be Pollitt's view on why people get married. People should get married for when they love each other. And that's probably going to be the most common response that I would expect 11th graders in high school who have no idea what love is. I thought you were going to go, Mr. King, I know love. No, you're not going there. Okay. So her value when it comes to marriage is going to center around the idea of love. What's his whole purpose behind marriage? I wouldn't I say it would be religious based. I wouldn't say strictly just religion. Ben, did you? Procreation, which means to have kids. All right. So his whole purpose of marriage is the ability to have children. Those are two very different perspectives. So the chances of these two ever really agreeing on the issue, let's be honest, are very slim to none. Now, if you are going to try to convince one or the other as to why you think your side would be right and their side wrong, you would need to think about it from his side. Well, he's dealing with procreation. Here's why that might not necessarily work, when it comes to a reason as to not to have same-sex marriage. If you're trying to convince her, well, now you have to take a look at it from the love aspect. So understanding a person's values are very important when it comes to any kind of issue that you're looking at. You take something as simple as global warming. Most folks are probably under the assumption that global warming is occurring, greenhouse gas effects and all that kind of stuff. Don't have to say you believe or it's not. What is the fear of global warming? We're all going to die. It is a life and death issue. So, the whole idea of, well, no, I'm still going to drive my Ford F-350 and get 2 miles of gas and put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because it's convenient for me. If I'm looking at it from a convenience perspective and you're looking at it life and death perspective, we're on two totally separate ends of the spectrum. So understanding these values for you as a writer, that's going to be important should a topic like this come up or anything else that's going to be emotionally charged. How would your opponent be looking at it from a value standpoint if you want to at least kind of understand that? More reactions, whether it be about Pollitt or about Colson.
Well, I think Colson's argument was a lot stronger, specifically because he was pulling statistics and other things that really backed up his argument, while Pollitt used a lot of current opinions on what she thought gay marriage.
He loves going with the statistics and his studies, whatnot. A lot of statistic study aspects. A lot of folks also have problems with the statistics and the studies that he also brings forward. What are, in his mind, detriments that could occur if same-sex marriage be legalized?
Said that children who don't have fathers
You're going to have a spike in criminals. What else?
kids without fathers, they're the daughters will have children.
So the cycle will kind of continue on to if children from single parent homes are more likely to become single parents.
Yeah.
So the whole idea about the marriage aspect, it's going to be an unending cycle that will not get corrected in his mind. Unending cycle. Elaine, did you have something else?
I was going to say the argument about how children growing up without fathers are going to become criminals. That's kind of countered by what if there's two fathers?
There's
This is going to start to be worked out. Well, Shelby, do you have something to say?
There's another hole in his argument about procreation, because not all heterosexual couples have children.
Not all heterosexual couples can have children. I mean, medically, it's just not possible for some couples. Some couples don't want to have children. no offense to my friends, I have some friends who should not have kids and currently do not have kids. And I think it's in everyone's best interest if it stays that way. Which, I mean, you think, and dependent upon, again, your view, Mr. Weber will probably agree with this. I will certainly agree with it. It's a tough job. I am very thankful that there are two parents in the household because some days we need Mrs. Kane there so that I don't be a bad parent. Some days she needs me there so that her top doesn't blow and all that kind of stuff. So certainly, yeah, it is helpful to have two parents. Now, your point, well, you could have same-sex marriage. What is certainly an agency that is always looking for more parents out there? Adoption agencies, foster homes, things like that. And again, if a one-parent household is going to lead to these things, and we could certainly argue that that's not necessarily a correlation. That's a whole other issue. Wouldn't it be better to have two moms, two dads? That could certainly be a counter-argument, absolutely, that would take place. Does that marriage, because you're mentioning that you have some heterosexual couples who cannot have kids, is that marriage therefore voided because they are unable to have children? How can you really tell stylistically, and now I'm thinking of a rhetorical analysis, how can you tell that Colson really does not view same-sex marriage as being marriage? Like from a stylistic standpoint, Olivia?
When he talks about gay marriage, he puts it in like quotation.
Anytime it gets written, he does, the quotation mark, which is a terrible thing when your kids start to use it. Daddy, I love you.
They do that.
Maybe around 6. Okay, Mom. Very bad. You don't want to go in that direction. So what is he, essentially he's going, this is not real marriage. Which, going to Shelby's point, are you therefore going to argue that heterosexual couples who do not have kids, is that therefore not marriage? Now again, this kind of goes back to what is your viewpoint? If it's about having children, then it's not going to be marriage. Her going, well, if it's about love, then it still could be a marriage or a union taking place. Someone else have a hand up before we were...
I just wanted to say that you talked about how Pollitt does a good job and like clearly makes an effort to counter every
Mhm.
But Colson makes an attempt, but he doesn't even address the separation of church and state that Pollitt ended up focusing on, which I feel like is the main argument for gay marriage, and Colson didn't address it.
And he's in a tough spot because if a lot of his perspective is religious based, he probably wants to avoid the whole separation of church and state argument as much as he can because, hey, within a government, we're not meant to incorporate, that aspect. So it certainly puts him behind the 8 ball in some ways. Now, I don't know if anyone took notice to this. Anyone realized the publication that this is being printed in, and it's in the little background information. Underneath the title on page 566, written with Ann Morse for Christianity Today in 2004, this essay presents a case against same-sex marriage and thus counters the preceding essay. What's the publication? Christian Today. So why is he probably not going to bring it up all that much? Most likely, the audience that is reading it isn't going to be worried about it nearly as much. Again, he's not writing this for the Bedford Reader Anthology so that we can kind of pick it apart, as we're doing with Pollitt as well. So certainly kind of understanding your target audience goes the same way. Chances are, a lot of the points that he's bringing up, his readers very well may already agree with, based on the readership of that publication. The Nation that Pollitt is writing for tends to be a pretty liberal publication. Chances are most of her readership is going to be in agreement with it already. What would you say is Colson's biggest fear? Because I don't think his greatest fear is that same-sex marriage is going to be allowed. I think he has a fear that is greater than that in his mind.
I feel like his main point is that if gay marriage were legalized, there would be a rise in crime
He certainly brings that up. I don't think that's his biggest fear. I don't think he feels that he has a better chance of being hijacked, when he's sitting at a red light in any place. And now certainly he's going to try to use those things to heighten his argument. I think he even has a fear that is greater than that. I mean, personal safety certainly can be a fear for a lot of people.
I think if gay marriage is allowed, then the whole institution of marriage in and of itself is going to be shattered.
Yeah, I think that is his big thing. What happens if marriage is no longer, important to people? I think that is the part that he cannot fathom whatsoever. And I would say that is where his Norway study starts to come into place. Because a lot of people will read that Norway part, and now you're going, yes, I got that right, or no, I put down Thailand, crap. I think that's where that study becomes important for him. What happened in Norway? 1993? I like how when you ask questions, people start whispering to themselves.
They had a low out of wedlock.
What's that mean?
People that weren't married, weren't having kids.
So-
It's happening.
Okay, so a child born out of wedlock means the parents are not married. Think about that term so far as a connotation standpoint. Wedlock. That's a pretty negative, locked in. You know what they used before rings? We're talking medieval times. Did not have a ring to illustrate that you were married. The wife had a belt with chain that the husband could, Helena, can't walk too far. So you were literally locked into marriage. We decided that's not too. Yeah, that might be a good word. So we have switched it to rings, much more romantic.
Safer.
So if you get a belt someday, Abby, with a big chain on it, it's might be your proposal in marriage. But Norway has low, out of wedlock birth rates. What happens, then, according to him, after same-sex marriage is recognized in Norway? That low birth rate becomes a high birth rate. Now, you're reading it, and I think when you initially read it, you go, I don't understand what this whole point is of bringing this up. If he is afraid that marriage is no longer going to be important, how does that now start to connect with his whole Norway argument? Norway allowed same-sex marriage. The following year, out of wedlock birth rates increased. Because I can certainly see folks looking at it, initially, and you might even still look at it after the case, as this being more a false cause. Remember, false cause, A happens before B, therefore A causes B. How, in his mind, does same-sex marriage out of wedlock birth rates coexist?
Originally, he was worried about single parents and not doing one, so when the out of wedlock was increases, he was going to just one parent.
Okay, which is going to then have that crime rate and all that kind of stuff going on. That's certainly going to be one possibility. Any other ideas?
He's thinking of it as more of a theological thing, where already with the sexual,
Isn't it revolution?
but they said that the correlation between marriage and procreation is already decreasing, and then gay marriage was legalized.
He's worried. We mentioned this part with the quotation marks, where in his mind that's not going to be a real true marriage. He is concerned that, okay, if we acknowledge this union as being marriage, which we, again, speaking from his mind, we know is not true marriage, then why in the world does anyone need to get married? So his argument with the out-of-wedlock birth rates is you have people, and he doesn't state this, and he probably should to make it a clearer point. Again, publication, dealing with a target audience that probably already agrees with you, doesn't have to explain it nearly as much. His assumption would be that Harry and Sally are going, hey, they allow same-sex marriage. Marriage isn't what it used to be. We don't really need to get married to have kids. It might still be single parent. It might be two parent, but that marriage connection is not going to be there. And in his mind, he's afraid that this is going to happen, as I think Helena was the one who said it, the whole institution of marriage will begin to fall apart. And that's what he's probably fearful of the most. What's Pollitt's whole stance on marriage? And this is where she could kind of distance herself from some readers, or some might go, okay, that's good, that helps make sense. Jordan?
Doesn't believe for like marriage. She's just a fan of like monogamous free love.
Yeah, I mean, she sets up her whole argument, okay, this is why it's okay, this is why it's okay. For myself, speaking for myself, paragraph 5, I don't like marriage. I prefer old-fashioned ideal of monogamous free love. Does that have any impact, or what impact, if any, does that have on you that Pollitt simply goes, I don't like marriage? How does that impact your take, Rose?
I think it kind of takes away from everything she was saying because she's fighting for people to be able to get married, and then she goes out and says that she doesn't even like marriage. So why would she care as much? It's like putting it down.
So on Tuesday when we were talking about the logos, logical appeal, pathos, the emotional appeal, what was that third one? Ethos, which is ethical, credibility, appeal. It sounds like for Rose, and it happens certainly for some others, that this kind of takes away, detracts from her credibility. Why are you so worried about this issue if you really don't care about marriage in the first place? And that is certainly a reaction that a lot of readers are going to get. I probably bet it's going to be around a 50-50 split, where roughly half, so Rose is not by any means going to be the only one, are going to feel like, well, that kind of takes away from the whole point of your argument. Does anyone have a differing viewpoint with it where it may strengthen or it does not affect?
She like closer to the end. I mean, I don't know if it was before or after that, but she said that like marriage is owned by the state, so really it's just like a piece of paper.
Yeah, afterwards she goes into that whole idea.
It's not like a religious thing, so I feel like it kind of adds together. Like if you were to say that didn't stand for her argument, I feel like it sort of adds together with that. Like marriage really isn't that big of a deal, so I think they should be able to do what they want to.
It's like filing a tax return. It's a, boy, 15 years is coming up this summer. Maybe I'll like take a tax return and fold it in half. Love you. Think that would work? Yeah. Okay. But when Mrs. Kane and I got married, we had to get blood tests as part of the legal process. You had to get recognized in the county that we lived in, and then we also had to get it notarized and recognized in the county that the marriage took place in for that whole legal system to take place, that legal aspect of it to take place. When you traditionally think of marriage, certainly most people probably think of it taking place in a church. Some folks go to Vegas. I'm worried.
No, not like that. Whatever you want to do.
Some people will go to the courthouse. I mean, you got to go there anywhere to sign off on the paper. You may as well, have it take place there. So you certainly don't have to get it done within that church. So if there is a government legal aspect to it, you can't simply say it's strictly just a church view aspect. Would be what she's going with. Carol?
I think like also having on that is like she talks about like how marriage is fully owned by the state. If she thinks that's true, then why is she making a big deal that it's about separation of church and state? That makes sense. The state already
Yeah.
owns it.
Yeah, like and yeah, she would certainly go, hey, this is a state thing. Now other people are thinking about, did I put that for that one question? The state is the one who owns it because you have to go through that legal process of it. So her argument, therefore, is going to be to bring the whole church idea into it is not going to make sense. They already are separated. Why use a theological, religious belief, argument behind it if it's a state function anyway? So it's not that people have to get married in the church, and certainly there are churches for like heterosexual marriages that might take place. Like, no, I'm not going to marry you because not a member of the church, the minister, priest, whatever, does not really know the people. So the church does have the right to deny the marriage, but you can still go to the courthouse and have that ceremony still take place, have that process take place. So certainly that whole idea of that separation is a main point of his that she brings forth. Going back to the whole I don't like marriage, is there any way that strengthens her argument for anyone? Because I can certainly see a way in which if she's not crazy about marriage in the first place.
So it really gives her like a sense of neutrality, so like she's like separate from the argument, so like I don't know, like in a way it provides more credibility because like she's not on either side, like she just doesn't care about them, so she's like neutral.
Like she's not emotionally invested into one way. She's not looking for same-sex marriage to take place to benefit herself. She's not looking for any marriage to take place to benefit herself. And going with that line of thought, you could certainly go, I don't like marriage. But even I recognize that this would make sense for it to happen, same-sex marriage, would be a way in which, yeah, Paula can kind of add to the argument. Now, again, that's not going, Rose's viewpoint is incorrect, because we had a lot of folks first period going, no, I don't like the fact that she does that. It does seem to detract. And again, that's where the viewpoint of your audience is important. If I don't really care about this issue, but even I recognize that this whole idea on the other side doesn't make sense. That can be very powerful. But you have to be careful about how you present it. Remember yesterday, we had the claim and the evidence. Her evidence could be, I don't like marriage. But she doesn't really provide that warrant, provide that reasoning as to how that does strengthen her argument. I think she probably expects people that is a good sign. I don't care about it, and even I can see that this argument is silly from her vantage point, but if Rose is reading it, if I'm reading it and going, well, that kind of hurts your credibility, she needs to make sure she brings that aspect into the argument, which for you, again, moving forward, not TWA, but argumentation, DRQ type questions, if you provide evidence, you do have to spell out the reason. Colson doesn't feel like he needs to spell out the reasoning when it comes to the crime rate, when it comes to Norway, because he's assuming the audience will be following along with his train of thought. But that's not going to be the case when the AP English teacher from Colorado Springs is reading essay number 267418, which just happens to be Kaylee. She needs to make sure she spells all her arguments out so that there is not any kind of lack of communication or communication breakdown taking place between writer, her, and the reader, which would be that essay score. Both arguments, probably when the writers put them together, what are they thinking in their head? This is pretty good. This is pretty convincing. But when now you can kind of see, though, when you have a reader taking a look at it, things that in your mind work might not necessarily work with that audience nearly as much.
Please pardon the interruption. Attention all students, just a reminder, today is the last day that you can purchase your homecoming tickets. Tickets are being sold during all lunches today for $20. You must purchase your ticket today. No tickets will be sold next week. If anybody has any questions, please come see Mrs. Zimmerman in the Athletic and Activities office. Thank you. Have a good day.
Monday, Catching the Rye, we're going to take a look at Holden's going to be a divisive character. Luke's already sick of him. Other people are going to want to pat him on the head and make him feel better. And here's my stuffed animal. When you come in, first thing we'll do is going to be our reading check quiz. The setup then, so far as discussion, we're basically going to start with what are your viewpoints of Holden. So Luke can say his piece, and you're not going to be the only one, certainly with the viewpoint. And others can do the counter argument. Pay attention to the little details. Now, I'm not saying this from a reading check quiz standpoint. But pay attention to the little details when it does seem as if he's getting pessimistic. It does seem that he's getting kind of upset. What is contributing to that? I certainly would expect that if you've read chapters 1 through 16, if you haven't started yet, fine. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. That there's certainly going to be one main issue that is going to cause him to have a not so rosy outlook on some things. But what would be other factors that might contribute to that other issue that could also kind of put him in the spot that he's in? After you have read chapters 1 through 16, look over the first page again and see if there's something you can pick up on and talk about that stuff. Now we can.
Yes.